So my family was visiting not long ago, and we decided to take a trip to a beach known for its large dunes. Like any little boy, my nephew saw it as his challenge to climb up the dunes. So I took him over to the hill and we started to climb. As we started up the hill, we took off our shoes and allowed our feet to sink into the sand. It felt good to feel the hot sand on our feet, but as we climbed higher and higher, each step became more difficult as we sank further into the sand. After playing in the dunes, we began the journey back to our family, walking through the sand, across the parking lot, and up the hill. As we arrived, we were exhausted, our feet were sore, and they were covered in sand. Now, what might be hard for us to imagine, in Jesus' day, it was pretty normal to walk from place to place through dusty roads and sandy streets. It was just a regular part of life. And so because of this, a homeowner, somebody who had a house, it would be common for them to have a basin of water at the front of their house for their guests to come and to wash their feet in. And it really wasn't to keep the house clean, but really it was a form of refreshment. It was a form of refreshment for their guests of honor to come in and after this long journey to come to their home to wash their feet off as they entered the house. So the traveler would enter the home and a servant would bow down. And the servant would begin this task of washing the feet of the guest of honor. Towards the end of Jesus' time here on earth, he was meeting with his disciples. It had been a long road and a long journey that they'd been on together, and Jesus knew that the days ahead were going to be even more difficult. And so it's during this time with his disciples, with a basin of water and a towel wrapped around his waist, that Jesus takes this servant's menial task of foot washing, and he teaches us an amazing spiritual truth. We find this story recorded in the Gospel of John, chapter 13. It was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and to go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and the time he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that he had wrapped around him. Jesus was at the place of dignity at the table. He was the host at this meal that was going to be served. Yet this man, Jesus, he gets up from the table and he takes off his robe, which is the sign of dignity. And he ties a towel around his waist, which is the sign of the servant. And he begins to wash his disciples' feet. In mere minutes, with a simple act, Jesus moves from host to servant, as he foreshadows the ultimate act of servanthood of dying on the cross for our sin. And so, in the position of servant, Jesus moves from disciple to disciple around the table. And apparently, each disciple calmly watches what's taking place before them. They watch the scene of their leader moving into the position of servant. Finally, Peter, he voices the astonishment that the others must have felt. I mean, their teacher and their leader kneeling before them in the place of the servant. And so Peter says, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" He says, "You shall never wash my feet." And Jesus answers, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." Then Lord, Simon Peter replied, "Not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "A person who has had a bath needs only to wash his feet. His whole body is clean, and you are clean." This isn't about Peter's physical state. It's not about him being dirty. It's about his spiritual life. See, Peter had already put his belief, his trust in Jesus. He'd given up everything to follow him. However, along the journey of 3 years together, he's collected some road dust. These resentments, these doubts, these frustrations, these fears. And see, Jesus knew his disciples. He knew his disciples intimately. The road they had been on, the journey ahead, He knew this about them. He knew they believed, but he knew that they needed to be refreshed and renewed for their journey. In the same way, like Peter, each of us accumulates road dust in our lives. We're surrounded by broken relationships and hurt feelings, resentments and fears that we have. And as we collect this road dust, we all need to have our spiritual feet washed. We need to be refreshed and renewed and have this road dust cleaned off our feet so that we can take on the journey that's coming ahead. So then Jesus says this to his disciples. He says, "Now that I, your Lord and your teacher, have washed your feet," he says, "you should also wash each other's feet. I've set an example that you should do as I have done for you." You see, Jesus encourages the disciples to live out relational servanthood. The journey on the road of discipleship isn't always easy, and it can never be traveled alone. As we walk beside each other, we have to become servants to each other, helping each other along the way, providing that encouragement that's necessary to walk the road ahead. See, just like Jesus knew his disciples, the road that they traveled, the road that they were on, the road that they were going to be on, we need to know each other's journeys. We need to know where we've been, where we're going, and how we can be there for each other. That day with my nephew was a lot of fun. But like I said, my nephew and I finished that day sore. Our feet were hurting, they were sandy, they were dirt covered. So as we prepared to head home for the day, as we got to our family, we began the task of washing off our dusty feet. And so we took some water and some towels, and we began to try to remove every grain of sand that was on our feet. And while the sand felt good as we were walking through the dunes, as it felt good as we walked along the beach, it felt even better to have clean feet for the journey home. So I want to encourage you over the next few moments to physically wash each other's feet. At first this is going to seem like an awkward thing to do. We're just not used to this. It takes trust to be vulnerable. Trust to be vulnerable as someone comes and washes your feet. We have to be willing to serve each other, willing to be vulnerable in serving somebody else, willing to come alongside and prod them in their faith journey, holding them up when the road gets tough and we find it difficult to walk another step. Who is it that surrounds you in your life, symbolically washing your feet, refreshing you and renewing you for the journey ahead? Who is it that's coming alongside you and encouraging you? Who is it that's walking with you?